Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Music Made Me. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We truly do appreciate the support each and every week. Please make sure you are liking, sharing, following, subscribing to us on whatever streaming service you are listening on, and head over to social media. Give us a follow there as well so you can stay up to date on all the exciting interviews that we have coming up in the future. Today we are sitting down with Meghan Patrick. Now, she was a sports kid growing up. It wasn't until a major injury during her snowboarding career that music started to become a focus. It's been an up and down journey, and one that has led from Canada all the way down to Nashville. Now, 2020 was pretty disappointing because it was meant to be her breakout year in the US, but because of COVID, that didn't happen. So 2021 is set up to be her year. She's set to release her EP, Heart on My Glass, on June the 25th, and she is ready for a big introduction to the American audience. So please enjoy our conversation with Meghan Patrick. I love to find out how music has made a person all the way back to when they were young. And for you, it doesn't start right away necessarily because you were a sports girl. But I did see on social media that maybe you were about 3 years old and you were sitting at a piano with your mom. So was there sort of music around when you were younger?
Oh, yeah. I mean, despite the fact that there was definitely a period of time, well, most of my life, I was definitely more serious about sports, whether it was gymnastics or snowboarding or whatever. But music was definitely always there. And it was definitely a huge part of my life. I mean, I've always said, I was really lucky. I grew up with two parents that had great taste in music. My mom was a DJ in college, and so she had this epic record collection, and my parents were felt pretty strongly about, when we were inside the house, it was usually having music on as opposed to the TV. Just when we were in the car, when we were cooking dinner, when we were just hanging out around the house, like whatever it was, there was like always music on. It was always so many of my best childhood memories have music attached. When we go camping, we'd be sitting at our campsite and my mom would always have a radio on. So, I definitely got a lot of I was definitely inspired by a lot of really great music and had kind of an eclectic taste in music for someone my age growing up. I mean, of course, I had a couple, Spice Girls and NSYNC or Backstreet Boys albums, but the first CD I ever bought, like with my own money or like that I chose to buy, we went to like HMV with my mom and she's like, all right, you can pick one CD or whatever to get. And I picked Nirvana, Nevermind. So
Nice. That's a good
and
first.
I think she was like equal parts like shocked and like proud. She was like, okay, my job here is done.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. And so growing up, it was like you say, gymnastics first, competitive gymnastics. Your life was kind of taken over by that. And then it got into snowboarding. But
Yep.
talk about the eighth grade, I would believe it was, and you were in one of the school musicals, right?
Oh, yeah. So I think that was actually sixth grade.
Okay.
Yeah, because I remember, the school that I was in was like my elementary school. Yeah. And I don't remember why I tried out. I think like one of my friends was doing it or something. And so I was like, sure, like, why not? Might as well. And so, yeah, I auditioned and everybody was kind of like, whoa, like you can sing really well. And I was like, I kind of like doing this. This is cool. And my teacher at the time, her name was Ms. Martin. She was awesome. And I remember she ended up talking to my parents and said, I think Megan might really have something here, like a really special talent. And I know someone that can give her lessons if that's something she's interested in. And so that was when I started taking singing lessons. I guess I would have been like 12 or 13 maybe.
Okay.
Um, and then I took them all through high school. And the teacher I had a couple, but I had one main vocal teacher through most of high school, and she was an opera singer, and she saw, like, with me, I had this really big voice, really powerful voice, and a lot of range from a pretty young age, and so she kind of was like, well, you're going to be an opera singer, and I was just like, okay. But I think it was also with the snowboarding and stuff, like I don't think I really thought seriously about making a career out of music or even thought that I could until really like when I got into university, because my senior year of high school, I was snowboarding, and my initial plan was actually to defer my first year of college because I was really focused on snowboarding, and I felt like I had a really good shot of getting on the national development team. I was competing really well, and then I had a really bad fall and broke my back and dislocated my shoulder, broke my collarbone. Like it was pretty severe, and it was months and months of recovery. And I mean, one, it really scared me because I was truly very lucky to walk after that incident, and I don't know, it just kind of shifted my priorities and my focus. And I think also because while I was healing and recovering from this injury, I spent a lot of time listening to music and writing lyrics and writing music, and that was kind of the thing that like kept me from being super depressed and like losing my mind while I was laid up on the couch. So it kind of saved me. And when I came out of that injury and recovered, I graduated and decided to go and study music in college. So ever since then, that's where the big shift was for me.
And your parents, I believe, for your graduation present, they bought you a guitar, right?
It did, yeah.
So you were going into opera, but did they kind of have an inkling in their back of their mind? Did they know you were going to be doing country music before you knew you were going to be doing country music?
Well, I don't know if they knew like country music specifically, but I mean, the thing for me with like studying opera, it wasn't I mean, I learned very quickly in my first year that I really was not passionate about the genre of opera. It was
Right.
just, unfortunately, I feel like with a lot of Canadian universities and colleges, they're still very traditional and you don't have a lot of options. It's like opera or jazz, and it's all still very like, like theory and history and all that stuff. And not a lot, there's not a lot in some of these programs that's really applicable to somebody who wants to like get a record deal or a publishing deal. It's really mostly great if you essentially if you want to become a teacher, or if you do want to become an opera singer or something like that, then it works for you. But for me, I mean, I don't think I ever really was intending to like be an opera singer. I just wanted to study music. I just wanted to be a better vocalist. I wanted to understand, the theory and everything in terms of being able to create and write my own music. And after my first year, and I mean, I was already playing and I'd already been playing in other bands and different genres. And, I was definitely raised on a lot of not so much like country, like mainstream country, but like a lot of Americana roots, like Southern rock, that kind of stuff. Like Neil Young was a huge staple in my house growing up. The Eagles, the Allman Brothers, Skinner, like all Zeppelin, and like a lot of rock and Southern rock and classic rock. And so they knew that I really loved that music, and the stuff that I was writing on my own was definitely more in that vein.
Right.
So, and that was why I wanted to learn to play guitar. A big part of it was because I was starting to write music and I didn't want to feel like I had to depend on another person to be able to write songs. I wanted to just be able to pick up a guitar and do it all myself, as opposed to like be like, can I have somebody come over and hang out and like play guitar for me while I write lyrics?
And you started sort of getting more serious with the writing when you switched over to jazz in university, right? And you joined a jazz sort of group, and that's when the lyric writing sort of started to take off for you.
Yeah, so I had switched over into the jazz program and I'd made a bunch of friends that were also musicians, a lot of like horn players and stuff. And we became friends and we decided to start a band. It was kind of like a funk R&B kind of thing, like Tower of Power style music. And most of the guys, none of them were really all that interested in like writing lyrics or anything like that. They, our sax player, our alto sax player, and tenor sax player, like they would write the arrangements and like the horn parts and stuff like that. And our guitar player, was writing sort of the musical side. And so they kind of just left it to me as the only singer. They're like, you can just kind of write like whatever you want to this music. Um, so I learned a lot from that. And that was also the first band I ever played with where we really got to do like a good chunk of touring, and I got a taste of what it was like to be on the road and doing all that. And I just really fell in love with it and felt like I was getting closer and closer to feeling like, okay, this is what I want to do. And when I ended up leaving McGill to go to Humber in hopes of finding a program that was a little bit better suited to me, and honestly, I didn't want to like disappoint my parents. They wanted me to go to school, and so I was trying to make it work. And when I moved there, I was moving back towards closer to where I grew up. And that's where I met all the guys that I had the Stone Sparrows with my
Yeah.
Bluegrass band. And then that, first summer we did a full like East Coast tour of Canada. And that was definitely the final like nail in the coffin of my school career because I was just like, this is what I want to do. I'm like, I don't need a degree to do this. I want a publishing deal. I want a record deal. And I was like working and in school full time, and I was playing gigs and, trying to do all three things. And I just couldn't juggle it all anymore. And not working wasn't an option. So I was like, well, I'm going to drop out. Sorry, mom and dad.
And that lasted till about 2013. And then you guys split and you went solo. Now, how long did it take you to sort of get situated? Because I know it might have been about a year that you sort of struggled to kind of find your way. And then when did you join a management team? Like, what did that look like for you?
I want to say I'm not great with timelines, but I mean, yeah, after the Stone Sparrows and I kind of went our separate ways. And I mean, it was amicable. We just kind of all, I think a big part of it was that the other guys in the band had other jobs or other things that they were interested in that they could kind of fall back on, and I didn't. And I was
Right.
also starting to write just naturally. I was writing more country, like more mainstream country than bluegrass stuff. And I also was like, I was trying to lean my music towards something that was a little bit more viable in the industry, with radio and stuff like that. I mean, bluegrass is such a niche genre. It's tough to like really make it as a bluegrass act unless you're, like Rhonda Vincent or Alison Krauss or Vince Gill, like, one of these icons. And so yeah, it took me, I'd say it was about a good year and a half or maybe even 2 years where I was just really trying to figure out who I was as a solo artist, because up until then I had never been a solo artist. I always played in bands. So I was just kind of trying to find my own identity and my own sound. And I would say that it was probably 6 or 7, I guess like 7 years ago when I first found management. And it's been just over 5 years now since I put out my first record with Warner. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of those in between years between the Stone Sparrows and getting my record deal were some of the toughest years. I was really broke. I had no money. And, I'd kind of been on this high of having this band, and we'd been touring, and it had just been such an awesome experience. And then it felt like all of a sudden I had nothing going for me, and I was trying to rebuild and figure it all out. And then, when I started talking with labels and I got my deal, then all of a sudden it was like off to the races, and a lot of things happened really quickly. And I've learned to better deal with the plateaus and the lows and the lulls and things, because things are always going to pick back up. That's just the way this industry goes. You can't live up here all the time. And that's honestly what this past year and a half has felt like a little bit for me. It's been really frustrating because I had been working so hard nonstop for the past, 6 years. And last year was really truly set up to be one of the biggest years of my whole career in terms of, I just signed my US record deal. We were getting ready to come out as an artist in the US. I got my first Juno. We had a ton of great touring planned out. I was doing my first headlining tour in Ontario. So we had all this awesome stuff lined up, and then all of a sudden it was just like taken away from me. And it's been so hard trying to figure out like, how do I keep my career moving forward during this time? So it's been tough, but I think the silver lining of that is it gave me time to focus more on my songwriting and only on songwriting and creativity. And I think the result is that I've come up with some of the best songs I've ever written, the most honest and most authentic and most in-depth kind of song. So I'd like to believe there's a reason for all of it.
And on the songwriting side, like you talk about when you signed your deal with Warner back in 2015, things really went quickly from there, and you
Yeah.
started writing with some pretty big names down in Nashville. So when you first started that process, what was that like for you going down there and writing with those guys?
I mean, it was equal parts like very nerve-wracking and intimidating, but I also was just so grateful and so excited to finally feel like I was moving forward and things were really happening. And I mean, it was tough. Like Nashville, when you are new there, is can be pretty lonely and tough on you. It's very humbling. I mean, everybody there can sing and play and write. Every girl is beautiful. Every like there you will get very humbled very quickly when you move to Nashville. But for me, I think it was exactly what I needed, because it motivated me, it pushed me, and that was a big part of why I decided to move there, as opposed to just kind of commuting back and forth. After I signed my record deal, it got to a point where I if I wasn't on the road playing and touring, then I was in Nashville writing. And so I was hardly even like home anymore anyway. And then when I would come home, it was tough. It was like trying to shift gears all the time. I felt like I was living like two separate lives, almost like I was trying to be two different people.
Right.
And and I had all these great friends and great people that I lived with back home and that I was friends with. And this isn't a slight on them or anything. But they didn't understand. They weren't living the same life as me. They didn't understand like what it was like for me on the road. And I found myself not being as focused when I was at home, because I would just kind of fall into what everybody else was doing and hanging out with my friends, and when I should have been like being creative and writing and focusing on my craft. And when I moved to Nashville, I just felt like it was so good for me, because I was always surrounded by other musicians and other people that were working hard, and it just kept me very focused and motivated on what my goals were as an artist and as a writer, because I was surrounded by it every day.
And was it ever overwhelming? Because, like, at the end of 2015, all of a sudden you're recording with Vince Gill in his home studio. Like, that's just like, it seems crazy. Like, was it
Yeah.
overwhelming, or was it like, no, this is where I'm supposed to be? I've been working for this. This is where I should be.
No, I was very overwhelmed. I mean, to be honest, like, well, I think part of it too is that actually, right before I was supposed to go in the studio with Vince, I ended up getting sick. I had a really bad cold. And so I was freaking out, because I'm like, I am literally about to go into the studio with one of the greatest vocalists of our time. And I knew that I didn't have my full voice, and I was sick and I was like struggling with it. And I actually, at the time, I was staying with Carolyn Dawn Johnson in her pool house. That was where I was staying while I was working on it. And she is the sweetest person in the world. I had told her, because she was super excited for me, and I was like, I'm freaking out, like I have a cold and I'm sick, and like this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me, and like I don't have my full voice and blah blah blah. And so I came home one day from, I think I was writing or something, a meeting, and she had left like a box of Kleenex and like some cold meds and some chocolates in this little journal. And she just wrote me this note and said, I mean, I don't know verbatim, but basically just said, you're about to have one of the most exciting experiences of your whole career. I know it's not how you pictured it and you're not feeling your best, but don't forget to enjoy it and soak in the moment. I know you're going to crush it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like just in tears. Like, so, she really kind of helped me get my head right before I went in there. And, it was an amazing experience. I was definitely very intimidated going into it. But then as soon as, Vince like answered the door, and he's just like in a t-shirt and like sweatpants, like barefoot. And he's like, come on in, child. He's just like the sweetest, most humble, down to earth person. He made me feel so comfortable. We had a great time making the record, and it was really special. And I'm grateful for Carolyn as well, for helping me kind of get my head right before that experience, and remind me to just enjoy it while it was happening.
And when you released that first album, Grace and Grit, in April of 2016, what was the feeling then when you released that album? Was it a little bit of relief to finally have that first album out and be able to hit the ground with it?
Yeah, I think, it was like with most new releases. I mean, that one will always be extra special, because it was my first release as like a signed artist
Yeah.
and as a solo artist as well, which made it kind of equal parts like crippling anxiety and self-doubt, and but also, like you said, excitement. And I was trying to remind myself of what Carolyn had said to me, like, hey, you have worked for this for a very long time. You did the work. It's a great record. Just enjoy this, and just be along for the ride. And it it opened a lot of doors for me. I mean, it was a great first record for me. Um, and I'm, I will always be grateful for what that record did for me, for sure.
And so you toured with Tom Cochrane after the release of that. You wrapped that up on April 1st of 2017. April 8th of 2017, you jump in your car with old, who is it, Buck Owens, and drive down to Nashville. What was
Yep.
that drive like for you on that day, knowing that this was it? You were doing this. This was your career now.
Yeah, it was really exciting. Mostly it was just exciting. I mean, I had been, while I'd been on that tour, unfortunately my relationship at the time we had kind of gone our separate ways right before I left on the road. And, when I came back, we were supposed to talk and, figure out what we were going to do. And basically I came home and said, I'm leaving. I'm going to Nashville, which was really tough. He was a really good guy, really, really good person, and good to me, just not good for me. And vice versa. We just had different paths, unfortunately. But I think it was probably easier on me because I had the luxury of just getting in my truck and leaving it all behind and kind of starting fresh. And my guitar player, Ollie, and one of my best friends, he also was in the Stone Sparrows. We've been friends for a long time. He made the trip with me, which definitely helped, like having somebody with me. And, we talked a lot on the way, and he just, basically just reassured me. He's like, this is the best decision for you. It's going to be great. And I mean, there was a lot of growing pains at first and adjustments when I first moved there. A lot of times it was really lonely and I questioned whether I'd made the right choice or not. But I mean, looking back now, I mean, I couldn't be happier that I made that choice. It was absolutely the best thing I ever did for my career and also for myself personally. I mean, it's, I love where I grew up, and I'll always, hold on to my roots, so to speak. But I really do believe I ended up where I was supposed to be.
And let's talk about Walls Come Down now, because that was a really big turning point for you as
Yeah.
well. And I want to kind of paint this picture because I still remember the day that it went number one, because the week before it started to become a big deal, because earlier in the year, Lindsay L had gone number one. And if
Yep.
you went number one by the end of the year, that would be the first time since 99 that two
Yep.
Canadian country females went number one. And so
Hmm.
I remember the weekend before listening to the countdown, and it's like this big thing. And then the whole week, like social media from Canadian country artists was just like smashed with requested song, call your radio
Yeah.
station, get this done. And then I'll never forget the weekend when I was listening to the countdown and it gets to like number two and you realize it's not you and you were number one. And I mean, that gave me, I still remember it, it gave me chills. So I can't imagine what it was like for you.
That was, I mean, that was just such a crazy, amazing experience for so many reasons. I mean, one, that song was, it was not what people were used to hearing on radio. I mean, there was a lot of pretty tough topics in there and some raw emotions, and it was, and I mean, it's certainly not by any means like a complete autobiographical song of my life. There were bits and pieces brought in with my co-writers, and it was more us just writing a general story about, what it's like to, my parents were going through a divorce, and we started talking about that. And, a divorce it's tough on everybody. It's hard on the two people involved and the parents, and them, trying to maintain some kind of normalcy and sort of protect their children from what's happening. But then, and then it's sort of all, it becomes this bit of like sort of secrecy, right? Which is always with the best of intentions. But as as the song says, when the walls come down, I mean, everything kind of comes to light, and everybody handles it differently. It trickles down through the whole family and can be harder on some than others. And so it was like a very sensitive topic. And so I was shocked to begin with that the label or that radio even wanted to make that a single. I was like pleasantly surprised. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, this is real country music. This is real story, real people, not just like tailgates and tan lines and beer, And so that part of it was really cool, that not only was it my first number one, but I think it was a very special number one because it was something that had not been done at radio for a very long time. But it was also crazy because my boyfriend Mitchell had just gone number one with Drunk Me in America the week before. So the two of us had been like watching the charts, just looking at each other like, are we going to both get a number one? Like, this is crazy. And, so when Mitchell went number one, he was playing in Georgia. And so like he was playing and like at midnight, he was going to be officially at number one that night at the show.
Right.
And so my friend Renee and I decided to drive down and surprise him at the show. So we got to celebrate on the bus and everything after he went number one. It was awesome. And then the weekend after that, he was actually playing again in another area, another city in Georgia. And so he asked me to come out on the road with him so we could be together should we have something to celebrate. And so that whole day, I was just like, my nerves were fried. I had so much anxiety. I was freaking out. So he was like doing sound check and getting ready. So I was like, I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back in a couple hours. I just need to like clear my head and whatever. So I'm walking around and I walked by this tattoo shop and they were playing Whiskey Myers, which is like one of my favorite bands. So I kind of perked up and I was like, I'm going to go get a tattoo. And so I had been thinking about this idea, of having faith over fear, faith in God and faith in your path and what's meant to be will be and all that. So I ended up getting this tattoo that day. It probably looks backwards to you, but it's faith over fear.
Yeah.
So I went in and I got this tattoo and it was kind of cool because it was like nobody knew that I was there. It was like my own little secret. I just randomly walked into this place and I got this tattoo and I was like, well, God willing, hopefully this is going to be a tattoo that represents the day I got my first number one and not my first top three or whatever. And so I go back to the bus and Mitchell's like, where have you been? I was like, I got a tattoo. He's like, what? So he goes on stage. He was like looking at the charts and he basically, I think it was Thomas Rhett. We were like battling each other for that number one spot, kind of going back and forth as stations were upping spins and all that. So when he left to go on stage, and I didn't have access to the charts, only he did because he had an account or whatever.
Right.
So he comes off stage and he's like, did you get it? And I was like, I haven't heard anything from the label. So like, I guess not. I don't know. And he's like, let me just check. And so he pulls his phone up and he's looking at it and he goes, he's like, oh man. He's like, babe, I'm so sorry. Is that a number one? Did you just go number one? And I just started sobbing. And he's like, all right, guys, let's do shots. So we got to celebrate together. I mean, just to be able to be with each other in both of those pivotal moments, knowing how hard the other one had worked, knowing all the sacrifices and being able to share that moment together. That was also like probably the drunkest month of our lives because people just like kept stopping by the house and like bringing us bottles of booze to like celebrate. By the end of that, I'm like, okay, we need to like detox for a month. But I mean, I think just the fact that we got to experience that together, like a week apart, that's just, I couldn't ask for a more special moment than that.
Yeah. And along the way with Mitchell, what has it been like to almost grow within your careers at the same pace almost with each other over the last few years?
Yeah, it's been, for the most part, I mean, when I met Mitchell, he hadn't even signed his record deal when we first started talking. Like he signed his deal within, I think like a month or two of when we first started seeing each other. So before that, I mean, he was already pretty well known as a songwriter and, as a singer and artist around town, but like his true like career path really didn't start until after we started dating. So I did get to watch him just really blow up really quickly. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I still didn't have my record deal in the US. So I was doing stuff in Canada, but I'd already been doing that for, 4+ years, in Canada.
Right.
And so it was crazy for me to see because the starts of our careers were very different. I mean, he blew up really fast, like within a year. Whereas for me, it was more of a slow burn, steady climb kind of thing. And, I also was going through some things with changes in my team and some really hard times in my own career while he was sort of like really at the top of his game. And we've had moments like that throughout both of our careers where I've been like at the top of my game and he's kind of on the low and he's struggling or vice versa. And I think it's been it's, it's been, we've both learned lessons about how to handle that, how to be, how to be sensitive to the other person's struggles while, and then also being able to be happy for them and excited for them when things are going great for them and maybe not so much for you. And I think we've navigated that really well. And it's funny because Mitchell and I are both very competitive people by nature, but we're not competitive with each other. We really do love each other and want the best for each other and support each other. We celebrate the successes. We are there for each other for the disappointments. But yeah, it's, it can be tough sometimes being in the same industry and, learning how to navigate that, especially when we're in totally different places.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a learning curve for us, but I think we've navigated it pretty well so far.
And talk about 2020 when you did, well, I don't know if it was 2020 when you signed your US deal, but it was when you released your first single to
Yeah.
US radio, My First Car. What was that experience like, especially coming from Canada
Mhm.
and getting that deal? Was that just sort of more fuel on the fire that you were on the right path?
Yeah, it was really tough because I mean I'd already been talking with Riser. I mean I think the day they officially said they wanted to make me an offer was actually the day I put out the Wildest Me EP.
Oh,
So
okay.
we had been already kind of in conversations for a while. It's just record deals are generally pretty slow processes. There's a lot, especially for me because it was extra complicated because I already had a Canadian record deal, and then just trying to figure out how that was all going to work. But I mean, luckily for me, Warner knew from the beginning that that was my plan and that was my goal, was eventually to get a US record deal. And I've been really lucky. Everybody gets along great. We're all on the same team, and it's been really good. But it was tough because I mean, yeah, 2020 was supposed to be like my year to break out in America. I had the Wild Is Me tour and the Old Dominion tour with Mitchell, and I was basically supposed to come off the road from that tour, go in the studio, cut new music, and then get on radio tour and hopefully be putting the first US single out to radio by midsummer. That was the plan. And then the pandemic hit and we kept having to push things off, and it went from, okay, it's just a couple weeks, and then it's like, no, now it's 2 months and another month. And then I watched slowly as like every festival and show and tour date I had just disappeared off my calendar one by one, until finally, like, I remember the day the last show I had booked for 2020 was canceled, and I was like, wow, like I'm really not going to play any shows this year. This is crazy. And we didn't really know. We were trying to figure out how and if and when we were going to put a single to radio in the US. And we felt we had a really strong single, and so we decided to go to radio at the end of last year. And we also were doing that with the impression that things were going to be like back to normal by the beginning of 2021. And I'd
Right.
be able to go out and do a radio tour. Like, we could get it to radio, get that first initial push. And then top of the year 2021, I get out and do a radio tour. Well, obviously that didn't happen. We're just now in almost June starting to get shows back. And so, unfortunately, that single just didn't get what it needed because I couldn't get out and tour. I couldn't meet the people at radio. A lot of people I made relationships with before the pandemic lost their jobs, so a lot of my champions at radio weren't even there anymore. And, there was a lot of new artists trying to break. I mean, there have not been hardly any new artists that have broken at radio since this pandemic because there's just a lot going on and nobody's able to get out and promote themselves or make relationships with the programmers and all that. So it was definitely a little bit disappointing and frustrating, but it is what it is, and everybody's kind of in the same boat, so it's not like that disappointment was specific just to me.
Yeah, and you finally have the new album ready to go. It's going to be released in June. Now, Heart on My Glass is the name of it. Is this something that you had like ready to go at the beginning of 2020 that you were planning on releasing earlier, or did it come together during 2020?
I mean, I'll say this, and this is like kind of what I think, or I hope at least, is going to be sort of the silver lining of this whole pandemic and this experience. I mean, had I made a record back when I was supposed to, like, more beginning of 2020, it would have been a different record. There's a couple songs for sure that are on this record that would have been on that one, but there's a very large chunk of songs on this record that I wrote during the pandemic. And I don't think that I don't know that I would have even written some of those songs had I been touring and doing everything the way like as planned in 2020. You
Right.
know, I had a lot of time during this pandemic to just self reflect and think about who I am and who I want to be as an artist and how I want to present myself and how I want to say it. And I think especially my sound too, because, you know, going back to Grace and Grit and my first record, you know, at the time when we made that record, it was a pretty like traditional country record. And especially in comparison to what else was at radio in Canada at the time. And I think that was part of why that record was pretty successful for me, is because it was kind of filling a void for a lot of people that still love the more traditional sound as opposed to the more pop country sound. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I mean, that record was and still is very authentic to me, but I've also grown and evolved a lot since that record. And I realized as I was going in to write and stuff during this past year, I mean, I wrote like every single day of this pandemic, and I was realizing that I had been kind of putting myself in a box, like almost subconsciously, in terms of what I could write and what I couldn't, because after that record, it was like I almost inadvertently became sort of this poster child for this more traditional sound. And then it felt like, well, I couldn't veer from that because I didn't want to disappoint my fans. I wanted to give them what they wanted. I wanted to make everybody happy. And I realized that there was this whole other part of me and my sound and my creativity and my inspiration that was being kind of stifled in the name of, you know, sticking to that one thing. And so over the pandemic, I had all this time to just write. And I wasn't on a deadline to get a record done or anything like that. I was just writing to write and be creative. And so I took a lot more chances sonically and musically. And I'm like, let's just try something weird or like something different today. And a lot of those songs ended up on the record. And I think that's why I do feel like, as much as every record I've put out has always been authentic and true to me, there's a lot more on this record that shows all of the sides of me, all of the layers. It's more in depth and more raw and more authentic than anything else, just because I had time to dig a lot deeper. And I also had the luxury of not trying to like chase anything or turn anything in on a deadline. I was just writing what I wanted to write and what felt good to me.
Right. And so is it pretty exciting then to have this as sort of your debut to America and have it so authentic and be able to really have a fresh start and be like, okay, this is the beginning?
Yes, I talked about the feeling of putting out a new record with previous projects, which was sort of, you know, equal parts crippling anxiety and doubt and excitement. And, you know, with this record, I don't have a lot of that anxiety or doubt. I'm just so proud of it. I'm kind of looking at this record like, if you don't like this record, then I'm just not for you. I'm just not your thing. And that's totally fine, because this is me. And, you know, another big part of that was working with a new producer. My friend Joey Hyde, he's also a writer, just so talented. And I mean, there are also songs on this record that are produced by Jeremy Stover, who did my last two records before that. And I love Stover. He is crazy talented, great producer, and one of my dear friends. But I also felt like, you know, Joey and I were writing a lot of stuff together over the pandemic and before that. And we were just kind of on a roll, and we had this great vibe, and he was doing a lot of the demos and stuff for these songs. And it was just something different and fresh. And it felt like it was really the direction I wanted to move in, just artistically and sonically. And so I decided to approach Joey about producing songs on this new record. And he was super excited about it. And because I also wanted to like co-produce, like I wanted to be more hands-on on the production side and in the studio, not just show up and sing, but really be there, talk to the band, you know, do my thing. And so we ended up doing that. And it was just, you know, the experience of making that record with him from start to finish was just such a great experience, because it was a shared experience. It really felt like our project, you know, and I knew that he was just as invested and excited about it as I was, because this was also really his first kind of big like record as a producer other than doing his own stuff.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was a really amazing experience making that record with him. And I feel like, I remember we both sat down, we went and went to his studio when we got the final masters and everything, and had a couple beers and listened through and, had our like emotional moment. But I just was like, this record to me sounds like what my music has always sounded like in my head, but couldn't always, get it out of my head and make it come to fruition in the studio. And so, yeah, I'm just super excited to get this music out there. I feel like it is a great representation, a true authentic representation of who I am as an artist, especially coming out in the US as sort of a brand new artist.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited.
It comes out on June 25th. I imagine it's probably equal parts It's Going Too Fast and equal parts, God, won't June 25th just get here already?
It's 100% won't June 25th get here already. I am not, if you know me, I am not a patient person. I don't like waiting. So I am like raring to go. I'm ready to get this music out there and start playing shows again.
That is awesome. And one thing before we go, I wanted to ask you about, because I wrote it down and I'm really interested about it. Back in 2018, in August, you did a writer's round at the Opry. Now, did you stand in the circle, or is that kind of like the Stanley Cup that you don't touch it
Nope.
until you're actually there for real?
No, I was, I feel like we took a picture with everybody, but
You were around it. I saw the picture.
yeah,
You were around it. You weren't
because I
in
was
it.
like, I'm pretty sure that I was pretty adamant that the first time I stepped into that circle was going to be the real deal when I get asked to like actually play at the Opry, like for real. So yeah, that was, I don't know, that felt like a very special thing that I didn't want to like cheat myself out of that moment,
Yeah. And do you feel with this album that is going to become a reality sooner rather
Yeah,
than later?
I think so.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on everything. Congratulations on making it through 2020 with some great music on the way. June 25th, Heart on My Glass. You can already listen to the singles Never Giving Up on You and Mama Prayed for You on all the streaming services. So congratulations on everything and good luck with the release at the end of June.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was great talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you guys once again so much for listening. And thank you to Meghan for stopping by and sharing her story. Be sure to check out her new EP, Heart on My Glass, on June 25th. Please also make sure you are liking, sharing, following, subscribing to us on whatever streaming service you are listening on, and head over to social media. Give us a follow there as well so you can stay up to date on all the exciting interviews that we have coming up in the future. Thanks once again for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Music Made Me.